All right, medical microbiologists, buckle up. Today, we're doing a deep dive into Bacillus licheniformis.
Getting right to the heart of what you need to know about this interesting microbe.
Exactly. We've got Notebook LM, Gemini, MicroWiki, even a peek into Micro's canvas.
Pulling out all the stops for this one.
Absolutely. And we're aiming for, well, you know how it is. There's just so much information out there.
Oh, information overload, for sure.
We want to cut through that and give you the good stuff, those golden nuggets you can actually use.
Practical knowledge, that's what it's all about.
Right. What makes B. licheniformis such a pain, but also surprisingly kind of useful, especially for you folks in the lab and the clinic?
It's a real head-scratcher sometimes. A bit of a Jekyll and Hyde, you could say.
I know, right? Like, the first thing that struck me reading through MicroWiki was that this bacterium hangs out on bird feathers.
Really?
Yeah, ground and water birds, specifically.
Huh, interesting.
And I was like, how does it even get there? And then what does that mean for how it spreads, especially in a hospital setting?
Well, you've hit on a key point right there. See, Bacillus licheniformis is a facultative anaerobe. Meaning it can survive with or without oxygen, and it's part of the Bacillus subtilis group. That group is known for food spoilage.
Ah, okay.
And those pesky opportunistic infections. So it's tough, you know?
So it can basically hang out anywhere. Makes sense. But here's the thing that gets me most of the time. B. licheniformis is considered non-pathogenic.
Generally, yeah.
Right. And I even saw some research on it as a possible treatment. So how do we square that with the fact that it can cause problems, especially in a hospital?
That's where things get a bit tricky, and that's where your expertise as medical microbiologists is crucial.
I'm sensing a but coming.
Well, here's the thing. While B. licheniformis might be generally harmless, it's known to contaminate.
Contaminate.
Yeah. Clinical samples, cultures, even medical devices. And that's a big deal, right? For accurate diagnosis, for patient safety, the whole 9 yards.
Definitely a concern. So we've got this bug that can be helpful, but can also cause trouble. Let's get into that trouble a bit more. What about the pathogenic side of B. licheniformis?
So one going to be aware of is food poisoning. It pops up in dairy products, cooked meats, and get this, even baby food.
Wait, baby food? That seems, I don't know, extra concerning.
Right. It just highlights how vigilant we need to be, especially with vulnerable populations. We're talking gastroenteritis, potentially even septicemia, life-threatening stuff.
And it's not just stomach problems, right? There's ophthalmitis, even complications during pregnancy.
You're right. The toxins this bacteria produces are pretty potent. Damage cell membranes, deplete ATP, even cause swelling of the acrosome in sperm. Interestingly, though, studies haven't shown any impact on mitochondria.
Wow. Okay, now that's the kind of specific detail that could really help us understand how an infection works. So if a patient comes in suspecting a B. licheniformis infection, what are we looking for?
Well, you'll probably see the usual gastrointestinal distress, stomach pains, diarrhea, maybe vomiting. It usually hits pretty fast.
How fast?
2 to 14 hours after exposure. Good news is it doesn't usually last too long, less than 36 hours in most cases.
Okay, that's something. But I imagine diagnosing it can be tricky, especially with those contamination issues we talked about.
Good point. And that's why being mindful during sample correction and analysis is so important. You need to know what you're dealing with to interpret the results correctly. Make sure you're not getting a false positive.
Makes sense. So we've talked about the trouble B. licheniformis can cause, especially in a clinical setting. Let's talk about what makes this bacterium unique, like from a microbiological perspective.
Sure. So morphology-wise, B. licheniformis is generally gram-positive, although that can change depending on the strain. It's rod-shaped, the classic, usually measures about 0.6 to 0.8 micrometers wide and 1.5 to 3 micrometers long.
Okay.
Another thing, it forms spores. These spores are centrally located or sometimes subterminally within the cell.
Within the cell.
Yeah. And the sporangia, the structures that hold the spores, they don't swell. That's important.
Gotcha. So given that it's gram-positive, what should we expect to see under a microscope after a gram stain?
Well, it's gram-positive, right? So thick peptidoglycan layer, that means it'll hold on to that crystal violet dye, so you'll see a nice purple color under the microscope.
Classic. But let's say we're trying to culture this thing in the lab. Any quirks, any unique features that would help us pick it out from the crowd?
Definitely. It's a facultative anaerobe, so it can grow with or without oxygen. On blood agar, you'll see these large colonies, kind of blister-shaped.
Blister-shaped?
Yeah, it's distinctive. They start smooth, but as they age, they develop folds and become more opaque. The surface gets rough.
Licheniformis almost sounds like it's describing those colonies, right? Like a lichen growing on a rock. Is there a connection?
There is. The name actually comes from that rough, lichen-like appearance of older colonies, especially on agar plates. They can range in color from white to brown, and they have these licheniform undulate fimbriae. Gives them that wrinkled look.
It's like they named a bacterium after a skin condition. Not exactly flattering, is it?
Maybe not, but it's memorable, right? And here's another helpful tidbit. B. Licheniformis is usually lecithinase negative, motile, susceptible to vancomycin, but resistant to colistin. That combo can help you tell it apart from other similar bacteria in the lab.
Super helpful. Okay, so we've covered its habitat, its pathogenicity, morphology, even its funny name. But what else makes this microbe tick? What else should a medical microbiologist know about its characteristics?
One thing that makes B. licheniformis so fascinating from a medical standpoint and an industrial one is its ability to produce all these extracellular enzymes.
Enzymes.
Yeah, tons of them. And some of them have really important uses in biotechnology.
Right, I remember reading about that. So it's not all bad news with this bug.
Not at all. You might be surprised to learn that B. licheniformis produces the antibiotic bacitracin.
Hold on, it makes an antibiotic that works against itself. That seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
I know, right? But it's actually pretty common in the microbial world. Producing an antibiotic can be a way for bacteria to compete, to fight for resources. It's a microscopic arms race out there.
That's a great way to put it. So this bug can cause problems, but it also has the ability to create something that inhibits its own growth. Pretty wild.
It is. It really shows just how complex and interconnected the microbial world is. There's always more to discover, and B. licheniformis is a perfect example of that.
Now, before we go any further, let's put your B. licheniformis knowledge to the test. A few quick-fire questions, just a little self-assessment to see what's sticking. Ready to play?
Game on. I think I'm ready after all that.
Okay, first question. What's the biggest concern about Bacillus licheniformis for a medical microbiologist like yourself? What's the thing that keeps you up at night?
Well, it's everywhere, right? And it contaminates so easily. I'd say its ability to mess up our samples, our lab cultures, that's a major headache. False positives, misdiagnosis, wrong treatments, that's a nightmare scenario.
You're absolutely right. That's the kind of stuff that can have real consequences. Okay, question 2. What's the deal with that name, licheniformis? What's that all about?
It's all about looks. The colonies, especially on agar, they get this rough, wrinkled surface as they get older. Looks just like lichen on a rock.
Right. It's not often you see a bacterium named after a skin condition. Okay, question 3. Picture this. A patient comes in with classic food poisoning symptoms. You're thinking maybe B. licheniformis. What's the one symptom they're probably complaining about the most?
Oh, that's easy. Diarrhea. Hands down. Usually the first thing to hit, and it's usually the worst.
You got it. Seems straightforward enough, but as we said, it can get serious quickly. All right, 2 to go. Question 4. What's something that B. licheniformis can do that might surprise even a seasoned microbiologist? What's its hidden talent?
Its hidden talent? Well, I'd say it's the fact that it can produce an antibiotic. Bacitracin, to be exact. And here's the kicker. It works against B. licheniformis itself.
It's like a self-destruct button. I love that. Really shows you the crazy ways bacteria have evolved to survive. Okay, last question. True or false, thanks to all the advances in sequencing, we now have a complete picture of the B. licheniformis genome.
That's true. We've got the whole blueprint, and it's been incredibly valuable for understanding its metabolism, how it causes disease, and even how we might use it in biotechnology.
You raced it. 5 for 5. Clearly, you've been paying attention. But let's be real, this deep dive hasn't just been about memorizing facts, has it?
No way. It's been about understanding how all these pieces fit together, the nuances, the connections. That's what makes microbiology so cool.
I totally agree. I mean, who knew a bug that lives on bird feathers could also produce an antibiotic that we use in medicine?
Right, and that's why it's so important for medical microbiologists to have this deeper understanding. It's not just about identifying the bad guys and throwing antibiotics at them. It's about seeing the bigger picture, how these organisms fit into the environment, their evolutionary history. It all matters.
Speaking of the environment, that's something I wanted to touch on. We've been talking about B. licheniformis in the context of food poisoning and hospital infections. But does it have a role outside of that? What about its ecological role?
Oh, absolutely. It's all over the place. Soil, water, plants, you name it. And because it's such a prolific enzyme producer, it plays a big part in breaking down organic matter, cycling nutrients. It's like a tiny recycler.
A microscopic recycler. I like that.
And there's evidence that it might even help plants grow and fight off diseases.
Wow, so it's not just a potential pathogen. It's actually a vital part of the ecosystem. It's helping keep things in balance.
Exactly. And I think that's something we often forget, especially in a clinical setting. We tend to focus on the bad stuff, the disease-causing potential. But it's important to remember that these microbes also play a vital role in maintaining the balance of life on this planet.
So true. Okay, so B. licheniformis produces antibiotics. It's important for the environment. It's even got a funny name. But there's one more thing I want to talk about. Its ability to form spores.
Ah, the spores. Yes, that adds a whole other level of complexity to B. licheniformis.
From what I understand, these spores are incredibly tough. They can help the bacterium survive in some pretty harsh conditions. Tell me more about that.
You're right. Spore formation is one of the most amazing things about B. licheniformis. But it can also be pretty frustrating, to be honest. When conditions get tough, no food, extreme temperatures, disinfectants, the bacterium can basically go into hibernation mode.
So they have this built-in survival mechanism, like a little bunker they can hide in.
Exactly. They form these super-resistant spores that can lie dormant for years, decades even, waiting for things to get better. And once conditions are right, they germinate and start growing again, like nothing ever happened.
That's incredible. But also a bit scary, especially in a hospital. I mean, if these spores are so resistant to disinfectants, how do we control them? How do we keep them from spreading?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's something researchers and infection control specialists are always working on. Spores are a big challenge in hospitals, food processing, anywhere you need things to be sterile.
So what are we doing about it? What are the strategies?
It's a multi-part approach. First, we need to make sure we're using the right sterilization methods, the ones that can actually kill B. licheniformis spores. That might mean higher temperatures, longer exposure times, or specific sporicidal agents.
Makes sense. But what about stopping them from forming in the first place? Is that even possible?
That's something scientists are actively researching, trying to understand how sporulation works at a molecular level. If we can figure out the key genes, the pathways involved, maybe we can develop inhibitors to block the whole process.
Like finding a way to disable their spore-making machinery.
Exactly. That would be a game changer, not just for B. licheniformis, but for all spore-forming bacteria. But there are also some more practical things we can do, especially in clinical settings.
Like what? Give me some tips.
Well, good old-fashioned cleaning and disinfection protocols are essential, making sure we're targeting areas where spores might be hiding, using the right disinfectants, the right concentrations, giving them enough time to work.
So it's not just a quick spray and wipe, there's a science to it.
Absolutely, and it's a science that's always evolving as we learn more about how resilient and adaptable these spore-forming bacteria can be.
It feels like we've covered a lot in this deep dive. Bird feathers, baby food, antibiotics, spores. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and I think it just goes to show how diverse and complex the microbial world really is. Even a seemingly simple bacterium like B. licheniformis can be full of surprises.
I totally agree. But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the biotech applications of B. licheniformis. We talked about bacitracin, but I know there are other industrial uses for this bacterium as well.
Oh, yeah. B. licheniformis is a real workhorse in biotech. It's used to produce enzymes for detergents, textiles, even biopesticides and bioremediation strategies.
Wow, it's like a multitasking microbe.
Right. That's what makes it so interesting. It can be a source of problems, but also a source of solutions. It all depends on how we understand it and how we use it.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to just how versatile B. licheniformis can be. It's a great reminder that the microbial world is full of potential, for good and for bad.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as we continue to explore and learn from these microorganisms, who knows what amazing discoveries we might make.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into the fascinating world of B. licheniformis. But don't go anywhere, because in part 3, we're going to put your knowledge to the ultimate test with a challenging quiz that will really make you think. All right, are you ready for the ultimate Bacillus licheniformis challenge?
Hit me with your best shot. I'm ready to test what I've learned.
Okay, good, because here it comes. 5 quick-fire questions, all about the amazing, the frustrating, the sometimes done-right weird world of B. licheniformis. First question, picture this. You're looking at a gram stain under the microscope. What color is B. licheniformis and why?
Okay, so we know B. licheniformis is gram-positive.
That's right.
And gram-positive bacteria, well, they have that thick peptidoglycan layer. That layer holds on to the crystal violet dye during the gram stain. So under the microscope, we're going to see a nice bright purple.
Perfect. 1 point for it. Next question. You're in a busy hospital lab. Contamination's a constant worry, right? What makes B. licheniformis such a problem in this kind of environment? What's the thing that makes you, as a medical microbiologist, extra cautious?
It gets everywhere. Seriously, this bug is a master contaminator. Clinical samples, lab cultures, even medical devices, nothing is safe. And that's a huge problem when you're trying to get accurate diagnoses and make sure patients are getting the right treatment.
Exactly. You don't want those false positives messing things up. Okay, now let's switch gears. Think clinical. A patient comes in with all the signs of food poisoning. You're suspecting B. licheniformis. What's the one symptom they're most likely to be complaining about, the one that really gives it away?
Oh, that's easy. Diarrhea. It's almost always the first and the worst symptom with B. licheniformis food poisoning.
3 for 3, you're on fire. Okay, 2 more questions. This one's a bit tricky. What can B. licheniformis do that might surprise even the most experienced microbiologist? It's kind of a hidden talent.
A hidden talent. Well, how about this? It can produce an antibiotic, bacitracin, to be precise.
Keep going.
And here's the kicker. Bacitracin is actually effective against B. licheniformis itself. It's like it has a self-destruct button.
That's the one that's incredible, right? Just shows you the crazy lengths bacteria go to compete and survive. All right, last question. True or false, we have a complete map of the B. licheniformis genome?
True. Thanks to all the amazing advances in sequencing technology, we've got the entire genetic blueprint.
And that's 5 for 5. You've officially mastered the B. licheniformis quiz.
Thanks. It was a fun challenge.
Well, I hope this whole deep dive has been helpful for all you medical microbiologists out there. We've covered a lot, from identifying this bacterium to understanding how it causes disease, to all the incredible and sometimes just plain weird things it can do.
Absolutely. It's been great sharing what we know, and hopefully we've sparked some new ideas for our listener.
That's what it's all about. Remember, the world of microbes is vast and always changing. There's so much more to learn, so much more to discover. So stay curious, keep asking questions, and you never know what amazing things you might find. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into the incredible world of Bacillus licheniformis. We hope you've enjoyed the journey, and until next time, happy culturing.